Hey guys, first things first, thank you so much for the overwhelming amount of support towards my Arrowverse retrospective. Uh, I knew that people would like it. I didn't imagine that people would like it as much as they have. So thank you so much, guys. And for everybody who watched it and everybody who shared it um, on social media or through other means. But there was a huge chunk that against my better judgment, I decided to excise from the retrospective as I thought it was just taking up way too much time from the videos, from the main topic of the videos, and I ultimately decided to focus on the main shows that made up the Arrowverse and all the major milestones that happened along the way, as opposed to the stuff that didn't happen or could have potentially happened, namely spin-offs. There were a lot of proposed spin-offs during that entire decade that the Arrowverse existed. A lot of shows that almost happened, but they just almost happened. So I decided not to talk about them during the retrospective. And instead, I'm going to do this rapid fire Legends of Fandom style unscripted video and just talk about them really quick because I feel like they're worth mentioning. I thought it was pretty interesting, like all the shows that could have been. So here we go. These are the 7 Arrowverse spin-offs that almost happened. Number 7, The Ray and the Freedom Fighters. So Ray Terrell was prominently featured during the Crisis on Earth X crossover, and they even went on to produce an animated feature focusing on him and the Freedom Fighters, fighting against the Nazi forces on Earth X. And there were some legitimate plans to make that happen as an ongoing series on the CW, and then suddenly they dropped it, and it was never mentioned again. There were a few mentions along the way of Earth X, like they kept reestablishing Earth X over and over again. It's like it's still there, it still exists, they're still over there fighting the war. But then Crisis on Infinite Earths became a really important landmark for them, and getting to that point and producing that crossover special. And once Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, the post-Crisis Arrowverse, there was never any other mention of Earth X or the Ray or the Freedom Fighters. Number 6, The Atom. So on the subject of Crisis on Infinite Earths, one of the characters that was heavily featured and they were really pushing as a major part of the Arrowverse was the Ryan Choy version of the Atom, played by Osric Chow. And that was for good reason. They intended to do a spin-off of the Atom featuring him as the main character with Ray Palmer as his mentor. And this was evident in the fact that shortly after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Brandon Routh and Courtney Ford, for that matter, both leave the show. Because that's what was supposed to happen. They were supposed to go on to have their own spin-off series with Osric as the Atom. And it didn't happen, but boy did they try, and they reestablished the characters again the very next year during the crossover event, Armageddon. Both Ray Palmer and Ryan Choy were a part of that. In fact, that was when Ryan Choy first puts on his Atom suit, which looked okay, could have been worse. And then nothing happened. They just gave up on the Atom. Then it was around that time that it really became clear that the Arrowverse was headed towards its end, and there was no need to establish any more spin-offs. Number 5, Hourman. Yes, they planned an Hourman spin-off. In fact, the original plan for Legends of Tomorrow was for it to be an anthology series, very much in the style of American Horror Story, where every season tells a different story featuring a new group of characters. And only season 1 of Legends of Tomorrow was supposed to feature that specific group of heroes and Arrowverse characters. But I believe it was the CW president, Mark Pedowitz, that basically put the kibosh on that idea, as he felt that one of the elements that made that first season of Legends of Tomorrow semi-successful was the characters. And if they just start a new season and it's a whole other group of characters, that they might lose viewers. And to his credit, he was right. Like, one of the things that made fans connect with the show was characters like Sarah Lance and Mick Rory and Ray Palmer. So that change was for the better. But back when they intended for it to be an anthology series every year, basically at the next season of Legends of Tomorrow was supposed to establish Hourman as the main character, as from the 40s, and he shows up and there's something terrible that happens, and he leads a few of the legends and a bunch of new characters on this time-traveling adventure to fix something that went wrong in the 40s, presumably very similar to the plot of the first episode of Legends of Tomorrow Season 2, where it's the Nazis that get a hold of the atomic bomb first. And so it changes the landscape of the war, and they have to spend the whole season dealing with it. And there were a lot of strong plans having to do with Hourman, even one where they considered making him, giving him his own series, like fighting crime in the 40s with the Justice Society of America, but it didn't happen. Number 4, Vixen. This was one that I was a bit shocked didn't happen. For a few years, it really seemed like any minute now Vixen is going to have her own show. The actress who played Vixen in the Arrowverse, the original actor who played her, excuse me if I butcher her name, I'm going to do my absolute best here, Megalyn Echikunwoke. Sorry if I messed that up. But she was featured heavily in the Arrowverse for a couple of years. She got her own animated feature or features. I think there was a second one. I'm not sure. It might be the same one and they just separated it into 2 parts. Not sure. She had her own animated feature. She was featured heavily in a episode of Arrow where it was established that she knew both Oliver Queen and Barry Allen, and she knew that they were Arrow and the Flash. And they were making some strong plans to give her her own show, and for her to be the first African-American hero to have her own show as part of the Arrowverse. And then suddenly it didn't happen, and the plans shift, and they instead planned to have her be a part of the Legends during Legends of Tomorrow Season 2. And right as they were headed in that direction, Megalyn got a better offer to work on something else, and she split. They didn't have her under contract. She was not obligated to be in Legends of Tomorrow, so she left. And for that reason, we got Macy Richardson Sellers instead as the 1940s version of Vixen, who was invented, who was created for the Arrowverse. That version does not exist in the DC Comics. Amaya, that version of Vixen. And, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, it sucks that we didn't get to see more of Megalyn as Vixen, but Macy was really cool too, and she was a really good part of Legends for a long time, so all's well that ends well. Number 3, Justice U. This, in my opinion, is the one that hurts the most, as they had been teasing for the longest time either a Green Lantern spinoff, John Diggle actually being John Stewart, the first African American Green Lantern, and him getting his own spinoff. And they kept teasing all these things. Oh, there's going to be a Green Lantern show. Oh, Diggle's going to get his own spinoff. Oh, it's going to happen. It is heavily implied. They don't show it, but it's heavily, heavily, heavily implied that he receives the Green Lantern ring on the last episode of Arrow. And they intended for him to get some kind of superpowers. They never, ever confirmed whether he was a Green Lantern or something else. That he was going to get his own powers and get his own show called Justice U, where he's mentoring a new group of superheroes. But he's the main one. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And I think they were in this weird transitional phase where DC Universe was about to be folded into HBO Max, and they wanted new DC content for it. So they were tapping Berlanti Productions for that content. They're like, oh, we need you to create an Arrowverse show, but for HBO Max. And they were like, well, how about Justice U? We've been teasing this forever. We can do this. And it was this weird nebulous time. Do we want to tap into the Arrowverse formula for this new franchise? Do we want to start fresh and just create new DC shows for HBO Max? And then ultimately they just decided to create new stuff for HBO Max and forget the Arrowverse. The Arrowverse is ending. And that was that. 1 minute it felt like it was just about to happen, and then the next minute it didn't. And they did an episode of The Flash where Diggle just looks in the little box with his superpowers and just says, "No, I'm not gonna have superpowers." The end. Which was anticlimactic to say the least. Number 2, Painkiller. Painkiller was a major supporting character throughout all of Black Lightning. And they kept heavily implying that he was going to have his own show. They literally did an episode of season 4 of Black Lightning called Painkiller, and it is blatantly a backdoor pilot for a Painkiller show. However, I'm not saying the episode is bad, but it is unintentionally hilarious. It feels like a 90s superhero show, like a cheesy 90s superhero show, and the episode heavily suffers from Wakanda envy. Like it takes place in this city apart from the rest of the United States, where that is very Afrofuturistic. It's very technologically advanced, but very heavily influenced by African American culture. But unlike Black Panther, where it just feels natural and cool and forward-thinking, it just comes across as heavily, just very cheesy, just super duper cheesy. And all the respect in the world to Jordan Calloway, who played Cleo Payne in Painkiller, who were 2 separate characters inhabiting the same body. Awesome performance, awesome actions, fight choreography that he performed in the show. Just a lot of good stuff from him. You could see how he could be a great lead and he could carry his own show, but just most of the stuff around him just came across as just cheesy and out of date. Where they could have done this could have been a very modern and cool and hard-hitting show, taking a step further than Black Lightning, where Black Lightning was a lot of those things. But Painkiller could have been that amplified a bit further, as it didn't have a great deal of... It wouldn't have had a built-in fan base. It wouldn't have had the long history that Black Lightning has. It could have built its own mythology and connected with a whole new group of fans, but just from the looks of that backdoor pilot, that just wasn't going to happen. And last but not least, number one, the one that everyone is shocked didn't happen, Green Arrow and the Canaries. So they had been establishing this show for years on both Arrow and the Flash. They were establishing what the future of the Arrowverse was like, the year like 2042 or 2040, what both Star City and Central City were like, how the Deathstrokes were among the greatest threats in that time, how Godspeed is one of the biggest villains in Central City. They established a bunch of heroes in Excess and Impulse and the new Green Arrow. Mia Queen, played by the great Kate McNamara. There's a lot of content. Like, if you took all the scenes from both Arrow and Flash that pertained to building up this show and put them together, you could potentially make a whole season. A whole Green Arrow and the Canary season. And then, of course, the next to the last episode of Arrow was 100% a backdoor pilot for this show, and it wasn't bad. And then the CW went, nah, we're good. We literally just finished doing an Arrow show. To have somebody else come in and put on the outfit and be Arrow and just do more Arrow, fans wouldn't accept it, and whether they were right or not, they decided not to go with it. And it's a damn shame, because you can tell that the producers of both Arrow and The Flash put a lot of work into it, into creating the backdrop for this show. And for it just to not happen, just to blatantly not happen, it felt harsh. In my opinion, I didn't think it needed to happen as quickly. I think they should have waited, like they did with Superman and Lois, how they waited a while. They waited 3 years. It wasn't their choice to wait 3 years, but because they waited 3 years, it gave them time to develop the show and give it its own identity. I agree that if it would have just been Arrow but in the future, it wouldn't have flown. I think people would have connected with it. But if they would have just waited until Flash was over and then premiere Green Arrow and the Canaries, then that would have worked a little better to establish the show's own identity. But man, that they tried. They even included the Mia Queen version of Green Arrow during the Armageddon crossover, and it just didn't connect. It just didn't work, which is sad, because she was really good at playing the character, and she was a worthy successor to Stephen Amell. But like I said, once the Arrowverse started to lose its momentum, the CW just gave up on it, and they had one eye on the future, and the future they went, and that future did not include the Arrowverse. So there you go. So there you go. Those are the 7 Arrowverse spin-offs that almost happened. Feel free to voice your opinion on them on the comment section below. As per usual, be civil to one another. And now for the obligatory announcements. Right now on my Patreon page, I did an e-rant on a movie that a lot of you desperately want me to talk about and share my opinion on, and that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. If you want to hear my thoughts, my unscripted, unfiltered thoughts, unedited thoughts on that movie, but you're not a patron, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/erod and pledge $1. That's it, $1, and you get access to all my bonus videos. You get to hear my opinion on a bunch of stuff that I generally don't talk about on this channel. And in return, you're helping me to continue to produce content. You're helping me to continue to be the blockbuster buster. Can't beat that with a wooden stick. So there you go. And now to announce my next honest review. And this will probably shock a lot of you. I've given it a lot of thought. And my next honest review will be One Piece. The Netflix live action One Piece. Now, yes, I already did an unscripted video talking about it on this channel. Why am I doing an honest review? During that unscripted video, I talked about how my experience with One Piece was watching it with my younger cousin when he was in his preteens. And he saw that video. And after seeing it, he contacted me and we talked about it. And he mentioned how in that video I talked about that the reason that I generally stay away from anime is because of all the gatekeepers. And he said, don't let those people win. If you want to talk about something, talk about it. Sitting there in my living room with you, watching all those anime shows, watching One Piece was one of the best moments, was one of the greatest time periods of my life. It's one of my most treasured childhood memories. One of my last childhood memories, because then I went into high school, became a teenager, grew up. It's one of the most wonderful eras of my life, and you were a part of it because my entire childhood, every time I wanted to know about comics and cartoons and movies, you were the one that told me about it. And for the first time ever in my life, there was something that I knew about that you were asking me questions about. And I treasure that time. So, yes, you might not be as devoted as a fan as I am. But the fact of the matter is, I would rather hear you talk about it. Somebody who, when they say positive things about it, it'll come from a really very honest and loving place, as opposed to those jerks that you referenced in your video that are gatekeepers that depreciate the franchise by being assholes. Those people are not fans. They are just assholes who are making the franchise look bad. And I would rather listen to you, somebody who's not as big of a fan, talk about it than hear them. So please, please, please do an honest review of One Piece. If you want to do it, it would make me very happy. Please do it. Suffice it to say, and I paraphrased a lot of that quote, suffice it to say, his words left a very strong impression on me. So I stood up from my chair and I looked at him and I said, of course I will. Of course I will. Of course I will! So yeah, Netflix One Piece will be my next honest review. Thank you for watching this video. And as per usual, thank you for your ongoing support, because I could not do what I do without you. And yes, I'm gonna be a good pirate.